It's the year 2020, otherwise known as the year of remakes and remasters, and Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of, if not the, most anticipated game of one of those categories to be released. I recently played FF7R, and while plenty of people have already voiced their opinions about the game, I really felt invigorated to say some stuff of my own. It's not every day we get a AAA action-adventure JRPG based on one of the most popular games of all time, starring two of the most recognizable RPG characters of all time. I got a lot to say about this game, but before I get into that, this video will be spoiling the game Final Fantasy VII Remake. If you want to hear my non-spoiler opinions about the game, here they are. The game is good, the combat is fun, the characters are likable, and the story is engaging. The downsides of the game are small and infrequent, but there are certainly moments of brief frustration, mainly some non-combat gameplay sections and some cringy dialogue choices. FF7R took me around 34 hours to beat, including every side quest, and I really enjoyed around 32 hours of it. It's an easy recommendation from me. If you want to hear the in-depth reasonings and rationales behind that review and don't mind talking spoilers, as well as talking about some other stuff, please continue watching the video. Alrighty, we good to get down and dirty with the spoiler sesh? Let's go, time for some Final Fantasy VII Remake. The story of Final Fantasy VII is that in this highly advanced city called Midgar, a group of eco-terrorists known as Avalanche have started rebelling against the planet-siphoning Shinra Electric Company that is running the city. A member of Avalanche, Tifa, calls up her old friend Cloud, who happens to be a mercenary for hire. The game starts with Cloud and some Avalanche members blowing up a Mako reactor, which is like a power plant. Cloud is then convinced to stick around and help out the poor people of Midgar as well as Avalanche, and is hired/recruited to take out more Mako reactors and eventually Shinra itself. During the assault on another Mako reactor, Cloud is separated from Avalanche and runs into a girl named Aerith. The two hang out for a bit, and on their way back to the sector Cloud lives in, they run into Tifa, who has been kidnapped by Don Corneo, the mob boss of Midgar's Las Vegas. Cloud and Aerith run around Las Vegas, meeting some wacky characters, do some wacky things, and end up rescuing Tifa, but finding out that Shinra is going to destroy the part of the city that Avalanche lives in. Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith rush to fight off Shinra and stop them, but it's too late, and during the fight to stop Shinra, Aerith is kidnapped. Now Cloud, Tifa, and Barret, the leader of Avalanche, set off to save Aerith, who is currently being held in Shinra headquarters. They sneak into Shinra HQ, fight their way to Aerith, and save her. Now, throughout the game, two things keep happening. One, Cloud keeps having these hallucinations of Sephiroth, a mysterious man who Cloud claims to have killed, and two, these weird cloaked creatures that keep showing up and swirl around for a bit. It turns out Sephiroth is real, and he kills his way into Shinra HQ, making off with the corpse of a being called Genova, and those cloaked thingies are Whispers, who work for Destiny. Like, literal Destiny. Like, their job is to make sure things happen in Final Fantasy VII Remake just like they did in the original Final Fantasy VII. Cloud and team escape Shinra HQ, and Sephiroth reveals he wants to break Destiny and go his own way. The team rally up for one final fight to stop Sephiroth, but before that they have to kill Destiny's Whispers, which they do, leading to a confrontation with the one-winged angel himself. After beating Sephiroth, the game ends with the party of heroes going off knowing that they didn't really stop him, and whatever Sephiroth plans on doing, it's going to destroy the world if the heroes don't end him for good. And also, with Destiny being changed, alternate realities have now been awoken. Even one where the legendary soldier First Class, Zack Fair, survives.
Almost there, Cloud. We're almost there.
Let's talk about characters. I think the main cast of characters are very likable. Making Cloud a character who can be cool, awkward, shy, and dorky is very difficult, but I do think the game really pulls it off. They make Cloud really feel like that awkward teenager who's trying to be cool and only succeeding some of the time. Barrett is a character that really grew on me. At the beginning of the game, I didn't care about him at all, but by the end of the game, I loved that man. And I think it's difficult to make either Tifa or Aerith unlikable. They're both fun and nice in their own way, Aerith being upbeat and sassy, really the first character to challenge Cloud's tough guy attitude by finding his strong, silent type persona cute instead of cool. And while there are romantic undertones in their relationship, it's a much more teasing, quippy sort of relationship than with best girl Tifa. Tifa being the one person who really knows Cloud and makes her feel like an old friend, if not Cloud's only friend. It's hard to articulate exactly what I mean, but the intimate moments shared between Cloud and Tifa have such a different vibe than the exchanges with Aerith or Jessie. A scene I really like is when Tifa is being carted away to Don Corneo's, and Cloud goes to save her, and Tifa says that she'll be fine.
I'll be fine. You've seen how much ass I can kick?
I have.
And Cloud just backs off like, she'll be fine. Even when Aerith argues that Cloud should go and save her, Cloud immediately says that Tifa can handle herself. There's a trust there, and a love that's felt more than said. What I enjoy so much about this game is that these characters and their relationships are built up over small interactions and moments. If Midgar really was only 4 hours long like it was in the original game, I wouldn't feel anything close to how I felt about these characters now, because the moments that build them up into fleshed out, likable characters would have been cut. And that's a big strength of the remake. It has more time to flesh out its characters, and it uses that time to do just that. The side characters, like the members of Avalanche, are okay at best and annoying at worst. I don't despise any of them, but I don't want to deal with any of them again either. And once the party started filling up with Barrett, Tifa, Aerith, and eventually Red 13, I don't want to take away time from them to hang out with the other goons. Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge are alright for the most part, but after the initial time spent with them is over, like post-pizza mission, they're barely on any mission and rarely seen again outside of cutscenes. They kind of felt like that cat and fat samurai and pig guy from Dragon Ball Z. Like, sure, you can like these characters, they're not bad, but for me, now that I got this full roster of people I think are cool and likable, I don't need to ever spend time with these filler friends again. And the villains are okay. Honestly, Hojo might be the only antagonist I think gets the proper build-up, interactions, and payoff. People whisper that Hojo is evil, you get warned about Hojo being evil, you meet Hojo and he's evil, and then Hojo leaves, still being evil. Every other antagonist just shows up and fights you or is dealt with almost immediately. Don Corneo, dealt with immediately. The president of Shinra, dealt with immediately. Heidegger, completely forgotten about and dropped for other characters. And Sephiroth is a whole different beast, and I'll talk about him later, but I feel like Sephiroth's motives are muddy, and the game gets real Kingdom Hearts about explaining them. The combat of the game is good. Most hits feel satisfying, and there's strategy in using super effective moves and spells to stagger enemies at certain times. Every character plays differently too. Cloud chonking around a huge sword, Tifa dashing all about and comboing like a Tekken character, and etc. Enemies also interact differently with different weak points and movesets. Blocking and dodging and maneuvering against enemies is actually really dope. The blend of old school JRPG and more modern action RPG works really well. The game gives you a constant attack button, so you're never just running around waiting to do things, but it withholds the cool flashy moves, spells, and item usage behind a meter. The pace of combat feels hectic and fast-paced, but there is also this sense of control, because you effectively pause the game to cast spells and special moves and plan out a strategy. Determining who is attacking what, which spells are super effective against which enemy, and so on. And there's this dynamic action to modern RPGs where you have to physically dodge attacks, not just hope the enemy attacks RNG into a miss. Also, weapon abilities are an extremely cool idea that I love a lot. In the remake, every weapon has its own unique ability that, when used enough times, permanently gets added to that character's move pool, so you can use whatever weapon you like the most and keep all of the abilities. I really like that idea. I think it's cool, and I'm glad it got me to try out a bunch of different moves I wouldn't have normally. And then there's materia. It's pretty standard to how materia worked in other games. You equip a materia, you use a materia enough, it levels up. Basic materia shenanigans. Moving on. Here we are at boss fights, and bosses in this game are some of, if not my favorite part of it. There are two types of bosses: big, giant monsters and elite humanoids. Giant monsters like the Hell House or Sewer Beast are okay. They're usually fought with a party, and they involve a lot of character switching, which is cool because it utilizes the different signature abilities of each party member. But then there are the humanoid boss fights like Reno, Rude, Rufus, and Sephiroth, which are all way better in my opinion. They are usually a 1v1 fight between Cloud and a member of Shinra, and they force you to block and learn enemy attacks. I couldn't button mash against these bosses because I would just be counterattacked, and it gives a different flow to combat than what it usually is. Something like faintly Devil May Cry-ish to how these fights go, in comparison to any other encounter in the game anyways. And I found them to be the highlight of my playthrough. As far as the graphics are concerned, I think the game looks amazing. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's a cutscene and what isn't. The game really channels the Advent Children art style, which just feels like an updated version of the combat models from the OG Final Fantasy VII. The game has stylized visuals which look really good, and adding on the increased fidelity just makes Final Fantasy VII Remake look like an even more amazing game. The music is also really good. It's orchestral, big, bombastic, iconic music from Final Fantasy. However, it feels like some tracks are way more prominent than others since they exist in certain areas, and some are exclusive to the areas you only visit once. Like the Tunnels of Sector 6. That track is stuck in my head because of how many times I had to go through that area. But I couldn't tell you what music plays while on the walkways leading up to the second Mako reactor. No idea. But the music's good. The side quests are good too. I mean, they're basic side quests that just let you spend more time in the zones you go through. The best side quests are probably the ones in Wall Market since they involve minigames and have the more memorable NPCs. What's nice about the side quests is that they're divided into chunks. When you first get to Sector 7, you get all the Sector 7 side quests. Same when you get to Sector 5, that's when you get all the Sector 5 side quests. Then, when you get to Wall Market, you get the Wall Market side quests. See where I'm going with this? And then the last bunch of side quests happen right before the final part of the game. What's nice about this approach is that there are a good number of quests, but none of them take too long to do, and you can do most of them at the same time. And that these quests offer interesting combat and minigame scenarios, not story stuff. None of these quests are ever mandatory and only really serve to offer more combat and flesh out zones you wouldn't revisit otherwise. Overall, I think they're good at being side quests. They don't overshadow the main content, but they're also nothing really that special. There's no pressure to ever do them, which is nice. Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't have any real big problems, but it does have a bunch of little problems. One of these little problems is that when the game is in English, some of the dialogue is just unbearable. But this is standard anime dialogue, honestly, though at some moments it can be too much. One of the worst story moments in the game is in this big climactic scene where the Sector 7 plate drops. So Cloud is in the middle of a gunfight when it just fades to black, and then we get this super weird conversation between Aerith and Wedge, two characters who have never met before, and it's too long and too weird, and it was too much for me. And then immediately following this cutscene, Aerith then walks around the slums evacuating people while going to save Barrett's daughter, a character she also hasn't met before. And while doing this, she even saves a different little girl with a whole other emotional cutscene along the way. When she finally does get to Marlene, another cutscene plays, and it's just in like the wrong tone. And it even ends in a lame way too. Then we cut right back to the gunfight Cloud was in the middle of. And that's just like a big example of the game handling some of its moments badly. But the short example would be Jessie's death. So Jessie dies, and we all know she's gonna die, but then the death scene just keeps dragging on and on. And then this, "Who am I gonna eat ice cream with, asshole?" asks like the worst question at just the wrong point in time.
Yeah. You owe me a pizza.
And then finally we get a cutscene of Kate Sith, a character who will not be appearing in this game outside of this one cutscene. Like, what? It's probably the most problematic part of the remake, is this one part of this chapter, with all of these awkward and poorly directed moments kind of happen all at once. But all in all, these moments are just lightly peppered throughout the game and don't really come up as often as some folks might believe. There's also some other awkward moments, but awkward mechanically. There are these weird platforming sections that only come up twice or 3 times at most, and they are rough. It's not just holding forward to progress through a limited action like story event, but it's not normal gameplay either, and that leads to these sections being awkward and clumsy and just uncomfortable to play. Then of course there's also air combat, which sometimes just doesn't work. You won't really experience a lot of air combat in the game, but when it shows up and then it doesn't work, it's really kind of tilting to be stuck there just waiting for like your meter to fill up so you can just one-shot these stupid flying thingies real quick. Again, collectively, these small moments don't ruin the game, but when they pop up, they really did take me out of the game for a few minutes, until I was then sucked back in for a few more hours. It's weird playing Final Fantasy VII Remake because it doesn't seem like a game that was made for people who don't know the plot of the original Final Fantasy VII. The thing is, FF7 is easily the most popular Final Fantasy game, with Cloud and Sephiroth being the most famous and recognized Final Fantasy characters. So it makes sense that Sephiroth is being shown constantly throughout the remake, and he has a little build-up in his big reveal because everyone playing the remake already knows that they're going to fight Sephiroth. They know he's the bad guy of Final Fantasy VII, and they know Cloud will eventually fight him. The entire point of the Whispers in this game, and really the ending, is that the game, or series of games, or whatever, will be different from the original Final Fantasy VII. If someone who's never played the original before wanted to get the modern, updated version of this like classic RPG, they would have to play the classic RPG, because this game will not deliver the original story. I would compare this to like Fate Stay Night versus Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works, or Full Metal Alchemist versus Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. You're gonna get the same basic story with very similar first halves, but there are little differences and eventually completely different endings throughout the show. If you don't watch anime, this is a lot like that Chris Pine Star Trek movie, where it sort of is a reboot, but kind of involves some older material, and it's different, and it's weird, and it feels like this game is made for the people who already know what happens in Final Fantasy VII, not for new players. Hopefully, newcomers to the series enjoy the game as much as I did, and they're not bothered by these weird questions I might have. I wanted to talk about the ending. The ending of the remake is kind of a mess for me. So the party is escaping Shinra HQ, and Cloud decides to hold off Rufus as everyone else escapes, and I'm like, oh shit, let's go. And I love that Rufus fight. I was thinking that the game was going to end after the fight. I was expecting that when I killed Rufus's pet, another bigger monster was going to drop down and fight me too, but no. I still really liked the Rufus fight regardless, but instead of the game ending, it just keeps going. Right, the party escapes Shinra HQ and has this absolutely terrible motorcycle boss fight. Then the game explains this whole "we're changing the timeline" shenanigans, and the Whispers form a giant monster you don't actually fight. Instead, in the most Kingdom Hearts moment of the game, you fight a bunch of smaller Heartless to weaken the bigger one. And I was already disappointed with the motorcycle boss, and this follow-up boss fight didn't make me any happier. However, after you destroy the giant Whisper, the fight against Sephiroth is just too cool and too fun to not be enjoyable. Seeing the sword fight at the end is so dope also, and it got me hyped and excited. Finally ending with one of my favorite video game characters of all time, Zack Fair, moments before the soldier will be gunned down by Shinra troops. Except, Zack lives. And the game hints at an alternate reality in which Zack Fair doesn't die, but instead makes it back home with his best friend, Cloud. It's an interesting ending story-wise. I'm all for more Zack, and hopefully without the stupid whispers, the game can just tell its story without constantly diving into talks about destiny, but I don't know. Mechanically, I think it just really starts falling off when you have this whole motorcycle chase, and then like an hour of cutscenes, and then a very lame boss against a bunch of monsters we have no connection to. Honestly, a big fight against Sephiroth is still really weird because the game didn't really build up to Sephiroth. It's just a really cool fight. With that being said, the ending does make me excited to play more Final Fantasy VII Remake and see more of where the next game is going to go. It just is a weird ending, to say the least. All in all, I really enjoyed my time with the remake. I found the main cast of characters to be extremely likable, and the combat to be some of the most fun I've had in action RPGs in a long time. I think the story for 32 out of the 34 hours it took me to beat the game was really good. Just moments throughout the game I think were handled poorly. And while I do think the ending really dips in quality, I do think the ending boss fight and cutscenes salvaged it. Hopefully you've already played the game if you made it this far into the video, but if you haven't, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a game I think is still truly worth playing. It's fun, exciting, heartwarming, and overall an experience you can't really get from other modern games. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good one, and take it easy.